Good afternoon, dear friends. This is Ruslan Belov. So friends, as I promised you yesterday, today we'll talk about the situation in the Belgorod, Kursk and Sumy regions. Before we begin, I'd like to sincerely ask you to subscribe to the channel. Your subscription helps the channel grow. Thank you to everyone who has already subscribed. I understand that many of you are more concerned about the situation there than what's happening on the main front lines, which is why you often ask for updates on what's going on. So let's start with the Belgorod region. The situation there remains very difficult, not just on the actual line of contact, that's obvious, but also in the border villages. Every day, civilians die there, sometimes more than one. A firefighter gets killed. A drone attacks a car carrying the district head who was delivering bread to people who couldn't or didn't want to evacuate. In short, living there right now is quite terrifying. As for the front line, today marks exactly 1 week since the Ukrainian armed forces began their offensive in the Belgorod region. And what do we see? We see that this operation has clearly not been a success for them because after a week of offensive actions, they still haven't managed to capture a single village. Yes, there were some problems yesterday here, in the area of the village of Demidovka. On the 6th day of the offensive, the UAF even managed to enter the village. By the way, this village is located just 1 kilometer, 200 meters from the border. The fact that it took them 6 days to cover that kilometer and 200 meters to reach the southern outskirts of Demidovka speaks volumes. But their happiness didn't last long. Almost immediately, they were pushed out of the village and retreated back to the tree lines, where they're now trying to regroup for further offensive actions. Meanwhile, they continue to terrorize civilians in border villages with drones. By the way, yesterday I posted a video on my Telegram channel. I won't spoil it here, but I'll just say it will leave an impression. It shocked everyone. Just follow the link to my Telegram channel and you'll find the video there. I'll just say it's not a happy video, so to speak. But everyone should watch it and feel the realities of war firsthand. Again, follow the link to my Telegram channel. So what do the Ukrainian armed forces have to show after a whole week of offensive operations deep into the Belgorod region? They've failed to advance deep into the region. Instead, they've stretched the front line by 9 kilometers. The deepest penetration they've managed is here, once again, near the embattled Demidovka, about 2.5 kilometers. And as you can see, they're trying to create a semi-encirclement. Yesterday, as I mentioned, they pushed toward the village itself and even entered it, but were driven out. I'm sure they'll try again today to enter and hold the village. On other sections, their penetration depth is about 1 to 1.5 kilometers. Near Grafovka, for example, they've made almost no progress. They reached the defensive line and got stuck there. Things are much worse for the Ukrainian armed forces in the Sumy region. There, Russian troops have crossed the border in another location, opening a new front line. Moreover, further movement there could threaten the encirclement of an entire UAF grouping. I promised to talk about the Sumy region, but first, let's say a few words about Kursk. Overall, there haven't been any significant changes. Things have returned to how they were a month ago. I'm not talking about the territories captured by the UAF, but rather the pace of their advance, which has slowed to a crawl. What can we say? Thanks to constant reinforcements from the Sumy region, the UAF has so far managed to hold Oleshnya. But the situation is about to change. There are several reasons for this. First, the Russian army has taken control of a border checkpoint, meaning further movement will head toward the northern outskirts of Oleshnya. Second, there's significant progress by Russian forces in Basovka, from where units will undoubtedly advance toward the highway, cutting off any further reinforcements. But we'll talk more about that later. The situation is also difficult near Guevo. Again, there's a constant flow of reinforcements from the Sumy region, particularly from the large village of Miropoliye, where the UAF keeps sending reserves. Plus, artillery and drone strikes from there target Russian supply routes, complicating movement and logistics. In general, if you remember, when the Kursk front collapsed for the UAF, I told you they would try to hold on to Guevo due to its advantageous defensive position and proximity to the border. And that's exactly what happened. The UAF is clinging to Guevo with everything they've got. And right now, I'll tell you, there's no visible progress in storming this village. Everything is moving very slowly, meaning the complete liberation of the Kursk region which, let's be clear, is impossible without taking Guevo, is being delayed, so to speak, put on pause. However, the UAF has no reason to celebrate, because they now have serious problems in the Sumy region, and they're significant. There are two, no, even three key points here. Let's go through them in order. First, the pocket has been straightened out here. This is between Novenki and the Kursk region. The total area that has come under control is 7 square kilometers. Second, it's not shown on the map, but Bolshaya is essentially fully controlled by Russian forces. That means not just this half, but also the remaining part. At least as of yesterday, there were panic reports in Ukrainian telegram channels claiming that the Ukrainian armed forces currently control only the southern outskirts of the village. And even that they are struggling to hold. Most likely, they will have to retreat further to the settlement of Lochnia. The rest of the area has been lost to them. This means that very soon, this pocket will be cleared out. As a result, the entire pocket will be taken, and the front line, which is currently 17 kilometers long, see here, if you measure the border like this, it's 17 kilometers, will shrink to just 7 kilometers. This will free up additional resources. After all, controlling 7 kilometers is easier than controlling 17, wouldn't you agree? But that's one aspect. The second point, which I have already touched on indirectly, concerns Oleshna. As soon as Bolshaya comes under Russian control, the movement will immediately continue northeast, toward the highway and the border. From there, Russian forces can advance into the rear of the Ukrainian garrison in Oleshna. And finally, Russian troops have crossed the border into the Sumy region at another location, right here. Currently, offensive actions are ongoing toward Vladimirovka. The offensive toward Vladimirovka has already reached the northern outskirts of the village, and fighting is currently taking place there. The ultimate goal, as I have already mentioned, is to straighten the front line completely by clearing out this pocket. The advance on Vladimirovka is part of this plan. Meanwhile, the front line for the Ukrainian armed forces in the Sumy region is stretching further and further. And incidentally, the Russian army is achieving significantly more tangible and meaningful successes here than the Ukrainian forces are in the Belgorod region. Overall, there are clear signs of major problems ahead for the Ukrainian armed forces in this area. Bolshaya Novoselka direction, as of March 24, 2025. Here, the Russian forces continue breaking through the main Ukrainian defensive line north of Bolshaya Novoselka, while securing the flanks of the offensive. As part of these objectives, units of the Vostok Group are fighting for the settlement of Vesyoloye and continue pushing into the line of strongholds between the settlements of Shevchenko and Volnoy Pole. Despite the currently slow pace of the advance, the threat to the enemy's front is growing daily. As soon as the Ukrainian forces are sufficiently pressured and pushed back to allow for a breakthrough northward, that move will be made. When that happens, panic and retreat will follow once again. Meanwhile, the Ukrainian command is deciding which southern direction, Zaporizhzhia or Novopavlivka, is more critical for them, so they can allocate their limited reserves. This dilemma will determine where we will advance faster and where progress will be slower. At this point, Ukraine simply does not have enough reserves for all fronts. Novopavlivka direction, as of March 23, 2025. The front is becoming active. Even Ukrainian military-related blogs admit that Russian activity in the Volchaya River basin has noticeably increased in recent days. Russian units have once again resumed attempts to enter and secure positions in Alexeyevka. According to enemy sources, fighting is already taking place on its outskirts, as well as in the settlement of Razliv. Thus, the next target, Bogatyr, is now clearly identified, and the Ukrainian forces understand that battles for this last major settlement in the Volchaya River Valley are imminent. Once it falls, holding the lower reaches of the river will become very difficult, especially if Russian forces achieve success further north of Bolshaya Novoselka in the Pokrovskaya arc. The Ukrainian forces are losing previously established positions from their counter-offensive. The fate of their counter-offensive in Pokrovsk was sealed by operations in the Kursk region. As soon as the Ukrainian command realized that their forces were being crushed there, part of their reserves, most notably experienced UAV operators, were urgently redeployed from here to Sumy. After that, Russian forces began advancing in this area. Just recently, Ukrainian forces were pushed out of Shevchenko, a key village whose control is of immense strategic value. Meanwhile, the Ukrainian positions are under constant fire from artillery, aviation and drones, preventing them from even considering launching new strikes. At this point, they are purely in a defensive stance. Occasionally, they attempt counterattacks to reclaim lost positions, as is happening in Uspanovka, Toretsk direction. The situation for Ukrainian forces has deteriorated sharply. The arrival of units from the 50th Motorized Rifle Division has drastically altered the balance of power in this sector. Even Ukrainian sources admit that they have no chance of holding the front for long without additional reserves. Furthermore, the front north of Toretsk has already begun collapsing, leading to the final clearance of enemy presence in the northern outskirts of the city. Russian units continue advancing further in the general direction of Delevka. The main question of the conflict and negotiations. The key issue in negotiations about ending the conflict is the status of the new regions declared by Russia and their international recognition, according to Witkov in an interview with Tucker Carlson. The question of international recognition is central for the Kremlin. Judging by the American statement, the United States may accept the principle of recognizing Russia's effective control over these regions. The primary issue in this conflict is, first and foremost, the so-called four regions. These regions are Russian-speaking. There were referendums, and an overwhelming majority of people indicated that they wanted to be under Russian law. I believe this is the key issue of the conflict, said Witkov. According to him, these territories are already de facto under Russia's control. However, the main issue remains their recognition by the international community and Ukraine, as well as Zelensky's ability to survive politically if he acknowledges this. The Ukrainian leadership has agreed on the necessity of holding presidential elections, Witkov also stated. Zelensky and Yermak have almost admitted that Ukraine will not become a NATO member, said the US Special Representative. A ceasefire agreement in the Black Sea may come into effect as early as next week. Calling the latest negotiations between Trump and Putin unsuccessful is absurd. Ukrainian troops are encircled in Kursk. That is a fact. Russia is 100% not planning to attack European countries. Trump and Putin may meet in the coming months. I liked him, and I think he was honest with me. Witkov said about his meeting with Putin, "No one but Russia will control the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant," said the plant's director. The most Ukraine can expect after the war is to receive surplus electricity supplies from the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. Neither Ukraine nor the US will be given control over the ZNPP, said the plant's director, Yuri Chernychuk. Officials have repeatedly stated that joint management of the ZNPP with Ukraine makes no sense. Instead, the plant will be connected to Russia's energy system. Presidential aide Peskov stated that the atmosphere of the phone conversation between Putin and Trump was absolutely trusting, frank, and constructive. He noted that a meeting between the leaders of the Russian Federation and the United States should be well prepared. Complex technical negotiations will be needed first. Russia and the US face a long process of working on a settlement regarding Ukraine. It is not worth harboring illusions about a quick resolution. The conflict around Ukraine cannot be stopped without addressing its root causes. The value of Zelensky's words is low, as evidenced by Ukraine's failure to uphold agreements regarding strikes on energy facilities. Macron's statements about a nuclear umbrella for Europe are highly dangerous. The Kremlin welcomes the change in Washington's rhetoric that has come with Trump's team. The potential for cooperation between the Russian Federation and the United States is hard to overestimate, Peskov said. Well, that's all I have for today regarding the situation on the front. I bid you farewell, wishing you a productive workday, and see you soon.